Welcome to the AlphaWarrior Show. We're excited to share diverse perspectives and expert insights with you. Please note that the views and information expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the AlphaWarrior Show, its management, or our partners. Each of our affiliates and sponsors and partnerships is a separate entity, and their opinions are their own. Today's content is provided for information and educational purposes and should not be taken as specific advice, whether it be financial, medical, or legal. While we strive to present accurate and useful information, we cannot guarantee its completeness or relevance to your specific situation. We provide all information as is and encourage you to consult with a professional advisor to address your specific individual needs. Your use of any information from this broadcast is entirely at your own risk. By listening further, you agree to identify and protect the AlphaWarrior Show and its associates from any claims or damages arising from your use of this broadcast content. Changes to this disclaimer may be made at any time and will be done effectively immediately upon posting or broadcasting. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you find the episode both informative and thought-provoking. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
How's it going, everybody, and welcome to the AlphaWarrior Show. I'm your host, Alpha, where we break through the noise and dive deep into the hidden truths shaping our world. Today, we have a guest that needs no introduction in the world of intel and deep state revelations. Joining us is SG ANON, a patriot with explosive insights into global power moves and secret military operations. Get ready. You don't want to miss this one. But before we do, a word from our sponsors, and then we are commercial and ad free until the end of this episode. So, first on deck, ladies and gentlemen, my partners over at Goldco, economic awareness. Now you're hearing about the economy, presidential corruption, and possibly a change to a digital dollar. But despite all the evidence, I can tell you what will happen for sure. Nobody can. So, what can you do is up to you. That is your business. But when it comes to your money, you should understand what's at stake. So, that's why I've partnered with Goldco, because I know that this can possibly help you at a time like this. So, go to alphalikesgold.com to get your free gold and silver kit, which shows you how to get into precious metals tax free and penalty free, even if your money is still in a retirement account like an IRA or a 401k. And you may already qualify to get up to $10,000 worth in free silver. You've seen the writing on the wall. So again, go to alphalikesgold.com. Link is down in the description to get your free gold and silver kit, because this is about taking back control of our privacy and our freedom. I can't predict the future, but I can certainly prepare for it, and you should prepare for it too. So at the very least, you should educate yourself about your choices. So take action, defend your freedom before it's too late, your privacy before it's too late, and your future before it's too late. Go to alphalikesgold.com to get your free 2024 gold and silver kit right now. Again, links are down in the description.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
You ask and we listen. We're finally bringing the most requested offer ever. Get the queen size premium MyPillow, now only $19.98. MyPillow is made with patented adjustable fill. It adjusts to your exact individual needs regardless of your sleep position. It helps keep your neck aligned and holds its shape all night long so you get the best sleep of your life. But that's not all. Get our 6-piece kitchen or bath towel sets only $25. Our brand new mattress topper as low as $69.98. Get our famous MyPillow bed sheets for as low as $25 and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get huge discounts on all MyPillow products, including the premium queen size MyPillow, only $19.98. That's the lowest price ever. Don't delay, order today. From all of us here at MyPillow, thanks America!
There you guys have it. So once again, support the people that support this show. All the links for my affiliates, my sponsors, and partnerships down in the description below, as well as the links to follow tonight's amazing guest, SG Anon, down there. Make sure you're following this gentleman. You want to be ahead of the curve. This is one of those accounts you guys need to follow. A lot of stuff that's going to be covered, some stuff that's weighing on the heart of my guest tonight. So as always, grab that pen, grab that notepad, and get ready to start asking some questions. Let me bring the man you guys really want to hear from tonight. SG, how are you doing, brother? We've finally made this happen. I'm stoked.
Doing well, Alpha. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. So, you know, I tell my audience all the time, man, I feel like we're in the 2-minute drill of the fourth quarter, like the championship game. Like, somehow here in the next few months, we're going to know what we're going through, whether it's something we like, we don't like. I think at least the confusion or the fog of war is going to be a little easier to kind of, sift through. As far as what you see, the connections you have, the circles that you communicate with, what would you say is probably the most important thing that my audience needs to hear from you tonight? And then at the back end of this, if we have some time, there's some posts I like to bring up and get your take on, but I'll give it to you, brother.
Fundamentally, Alpha, I think that we're in a period of time right now, which is sort of likened to being inside the breach prior to the actual inauguration of a weapon being launched, a weapon being shot. And I think President Trump actually told us that yesterday. So we've got, the rally that occurred in Mosinee, Wisconsin. And President Trump emphasized a couple of times in that rally, they want me in jail. They're going to put me in jail. And said that sort of like lamentful conversation. We sort of know on the Awakened Patriot side that this has been an irregular misdirection war, an espionage war, a war of call and response, if you want to call it that, for a number of years now. And so we've seen everything from the Trump arrest to Mar-a-Lago raided, various felony charges leveled against the former president / current president, and certainly the commander-in-chief of the Constitution for the Republic of the United States. And so I think it's very, very possible that President Trump is letting us know, look, I have to be sidestepped from public view. These people want me sidestepped from public view, but this is how we get our country back. This is how we acknowledge that we've fallen into a communist dictatorship, which actually was inaugurated on 9/23/2001 with Executive Order 13224 from the 43rd administration of the United States, which effectively suspended a great deal of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Most patriots out there will know that as the Bill of Rights, under emergency powers declared and granted to the president under the 1973 War Powers Act. So looking at this particular progression of events forward, I think it's very possible President Trump is letting us know that this is coming. I recently did a decode regarding President Trump's sharing of information on his Truth Social, which suggests that we're also going to see very soon, potentially even this month, some sort of activation of the 25th Amendment, a circumvention of the Biden presidency, which we've spent the last 3.5 years marring the legacy of Joe Biden, marring the legacy of the Barack Obama-Joe Biden administration. We've revisited a significant amount of the issues present during that particular administration, and now we're moving into, I think, the globalist exposure, the exposure of the NGOs connected directly back to the White House, the exposure of the embassy facade, which is merely a regime control network in the soft sense throughout most of the NATO Western world, how we strong arm supposed allies, how Barack Obama leveraged that same strong arm infrastructure. And with the incoming Trump administration in 2016, 2017, I think we're looking at a significant amount of exposure in these arenas. And I think President Trump has told us a number of times that terrorism, a terrorist attack, some sort of financial event here in the United States, all of this must occur either prior to or coinciding with November the 5th of 2024. And on the 9th of June, 6/9/2024, the exact same day that the 50-year petrodollar agreement, which essentially governed the petrodollar status in worldwide markets with Saudi Arabia, the same date that dollar ended, or that petrodollar agreement ended, maybe that's a better way to say it, we saw President Trump come out and say, I hope the military revolts at the voting booth. Now, the root word of revolt and the root word of revolution are the same word. And so what you're talking about with that particular statement is a massive communique to the deep state apparatus that remains, to the remnant that's now headless, wondering what they're going to do next, letting them know that the U.S. military is not going to stand idly by forever, allowing this sort of misentrenchment and misapplication of our election process and our judicial system to continue. So that's what I'm seeing from my 50,000-foot point of view, Alpha. We've got a significant amount of excitement and I think a great deal of original, unprecedented, first in American history style events headed before us in the next 45 to 60 days. My only question and caution out there is for patriots to be patient and resilient, and to understand that they are living through a transition of power, the likes of which has never been seen in world before.
And I think patience is fundamentally probably one of the most important things right now. But I also think, from, the listener's perspective, it also can be one of the most intimidating or scary things of, like, what's waiting too long look like as you kind of see these events that are going to be approaching here, fairly shortly, possibly. What are some markers people can look for that they can identify with, okay, I was told that this was probably something that was going to look like this. All right, here's another one. to kind of aid them in that patience so people don't kind of get overcome with their anxiety?
Well, the major markers, I think, from this point forward are going to be markers associated with the same types of events that we saw in both 2016 and in 2020. Remember, these were election cycles here in the United States of America where, for the first time, the deep state controlling apparatus actually faced down an opponent on the game board. We went from total hegemony of control on the game board going back a number of decades until the 2016 election cycle, where we saw NSA and a number of other patriotic intelligence agencies actually disappoint on purpose activities and efforts that had been undertaken intentionally by the Clinton campaign and by the Obama administration to install Clinton as the next president of the United States in 2016. So I'm anticipating that what we're going to see moving forward is very much a conflation of this. A financial event seems obvious to discuss. We're talking about the dethroning of the Federal Reserve. We have an entity online that has told us gold shall destroy the Fed. We have a number of records online going back several years to show that not only did we repatriate significant plane loads and cargo loads worth of gold during the Trump administration, but we also discredited and then bankrupted the American corporation government establishment as of December 21st of 2017 with a memo from the Office of Military Settlements. We also saw a number of bankruptcies of various corporate extensions of that federal reserve monster between 2019 and even going as far recently as 2023. So moving into this period of time, I'm expecting that we're going to see the actualization of some of this in North American markets. Fundamentally, I'm expecting to see that we're also going to encounter some amount of terrorist activity here locally in the United States. It's very interesting that the entity online called Q should reference the DOJ memorandum of October the 23rd, 2001, DOJ guidance provided to Pentagon and White House counsel concerning the deployment of the U.S. military in anti-terrorism operations. And in this memorandum, which went down essentially as a soft precedent for public record, not hardcore established, but certainly advisory and guidance power being imbued into this memorandum, it discussed the idea of the U.S. military being lawfully and applicably necessary and able to be deployed and used during anti-terrorism operations within the domestic, landscape of the United States of America, provided that those terrorist operations were being funded and coordinated from beyond our borders, from foreign forces, from foreign powers. And so I submit to anyone that when we talk about George Soros, we talk about transnational financing, we talk about multinational corporate influence in the United States of America, we fundamentally are talking about, at the end of the day, foreign interference, foreign terrorist-sponsored activities in a United States election, which not only puts them in the crosshairs of EO-13848, but also puts them within the crosshairs of EO-13959, EO-13952, and EO-13224, going back as early as the George W. Bush administration. So we have a long-standing national emergency legal landscape by which to address some of these issues. But unfortunately, we have to cross the Rubicon, if I can utilize the terminology, in order to publicly activate the justification to deploy these entities, not simply a first time, but as a second time in response to multiple continued violations of national emergencies that President Trump declared during his first administration.
You know, that's really interesting, SG. We see a lot of these executive orders that have been put in play. We know, Trump's administration, there was a lot of PEDs that were put into play. We don't know what any of those were. How much of this starts operating kind of outside the scope of the Constitution by the military in order to protect the Constitution? And I mean, how dangerous can that be for us?
Well, that's a really difficult question and a very tall question to ask. Fundamentally, what you're asking about is blending of civilian and military jurisdictions, and when we have to acknowledge that there is a need to transition from one jurisdiction into another. Without going too far and commenting out of my purview, I guess I'd like to say on that particular issue that the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, established the national emergency scaffolding precedent necessary to activate certain components of U.S. law enforcement and certain components of U.S. military law enforcement towards domestic orientation post January 19th of 2021. And if people out there watching the broadcast remember, we saw virtually a military takeover enacted on camera from January the 3rd of 2021 up until January the 21st, of 2021, when we saw the actualization of that happen. And we saw a major general on cable television on the 17th of January, which the audience out there will appreciate that number, discuss the idea of a peaceful transition to military power occurring in January of 2021. So what we're talking about, I think, fundamentally is not operating outside of the Constitution, but we're operating inside the constitutional framework present under Article 2 with regards to powers of the president, present under U.S. Code with regards to the powers of the commander-in-chief, lawful enactments of U.S. law that have been codified and put into place over the last 75 years, here of time from 1950 onward to the present day. And we're operating within a hybrid construct of constitutional and military law, which is allowing for the deployment of certain law enforcement and militarized operations domestically here in the United States. And we see this hinted at through various special operations, training operations, various press release operations discussing explosive ordnance disposal in the same jurisdictional areas that we later witness, typically within a period of a couple of weeks. We witness seismic events recorded by the U.S. Geologic Survey in the same areas. So it's clear, I think, in many regards that we're operating in a multi-jurisdictional hybrid that has been created as a result of the activities of the American corporation against not only the Republic and not only the Constitution, but against humanity writ large. We've seen a number of military traitors, for example, highlighted out within this process over the last 4 to 6 years. Since 2017, we've seen more than 140 military commanders relieved for loss of confidence in the ability to command. We've also seen simultaneous enormous expansions of Guantanamo Bay military prison, Greenland facility military prison, and Guam military internment facility over this same period of time. So this tells me, Alpha, that we have a multi-jurisdictional hybrid, the likes of which have never been utilized before in the history of the planet, that is informing a public-facing civilian jurisdiction of increasing destabilization here in the United States of America. And Chris Miller told us in March of 2023, I believe it was, that the United States military could, in fact, be used to preserve and defend the Constitution in a law enforcement sense, but not until the civilian sector of society has broken down. So when we talk about the civilian sector of society, we're fundamentally talking about the ability of civil authorities upon the territories of the 50 states of the Union to respond to the growing unrest. And incidentally, that is the exact same language utilized in the Insurrection Act of 1807. We know that the 25th Amendment is likely in the wings. We know that some sort of Antifa activation is underway here in the United States of America. More than 60,000 Antifa devices reported as active in the Chicago area, coinciding with the Democrat National Convention. And we're witnessing in real time foreign paramilitary gangs taking over certain buildings, certain infrastructure, and certain localities within the jurisdiction of the 50 free states of the Union. And I find it very fascinating, Alpha, that at the same time all of this is occurring, we saw just yesterday a literal cease and desist threat put out from the pulpit of the 45th president of the United States on X and on Truth Social, discussing that anyone involved for any reason in cheating in the November election of 2024 would be sought out, hunted down, caught, and prosecuted at levels that have never been seen before in our country. And I'm quoting at least part of that directly from the Commander-in-Chief's Truth Social and X accounts. So this is a very, very exciting but tenuous time to be alive. We're clearly waging a war of delicacy with this deep state opponent. It's very much a war of how far are you willing to push the needle, because at the end of the day, for the first time, patriots have the Joker card, the ace card in their camp rather than the other camp, and we are prepared to use it.
You bring up And I saw that post because you shared it on X as well. So when Trump puts out that they're going to be sought after, referring back to what you just said a few moments ago about people that interfere with the 2024 election, when you read that, that sounds like somebody speaking from a position of authority, not someone who's seeking a position of authority. You want to elaborate on that a little bit? You kind of pick up on what I'm saying here?
Well, fundamentally for the patriots out there that have paid attention to the executive orders, that understand the nature of U.S. code under the Constitution, that followed Federal Mission Resilience Executive Order from December of 2020, Chris Miller's statements, the activity of the United States National Guard federalized during 2020, active worldwide beyond January of 2021. That segment of the audience is going to understand that we're dealing with a foregone conclusion here. This is not if I win the 2024 election. President Trump stated in the tweets and then the Truth Social post referenced that when I win the 2024 election. So we are talking about a conclusion that has already been arrived at by popular vote, by free will of the American people. We saw the 2024 election reflect that exact same free will. We saw immediately after the conclusion of that election, at least in the public sense, Chris Miller was promoted to acting Secretary of Defense, having a careers-long exposure in hyper unconventional irregular warfare operations. We saw a number of individuals promoted post November 3rd of 2020 into significant positions inside the U.S. Department of Defense. And Chris Miller commented on the 12th of December 2020 that we have just completed some of the most significantly complex military operations in our nation's history. And so we're talking about all special operations components. We're talking about all air, Army, and naval operations components, some of the most complex, multi-dimensional operations in our nation's history is what Chris Miller was referencing and talking about. And so this entire period of time has very much been the attrition period, the draw out period, the antagonistically oriented period between republic forces, military forces for the lawful government of the United States, and deep state component traitors within the U.S. corporate Pentagon, acting at the behest of the Biden victory in 2021 and forward to the present time. Remember, we needed cooperation of the Pentagon for the second presidency of Obama, for the falsehoods that were promulgated and propagated during that second presidency, for the severe information industrial complex treason that happened from 2017 to 2020. That would not have been possible without think tanks and ancillary institutions associated fundamentally back to that traitorous component of the U.S. Department of Defense. And so living in the period of time that we're living in now, this is a foregone conclusion where those components have been offered the chance, I think, by God and God alone, to move back into the we the people category and we the people's, side of the fence, or be caught up in the unholy wrath that will come as a result of this presidential election cycle. And true to form, Alpha, we're down to the shot clock, and we know how human nature works. No one is willing to admit the pridefulness and the misinformation or the misinformed nature of their pulpit until the 0 hour. It's likely we're going to experience a tremendous amount of not only coin flipping, but also increasing desperation deployed over the next 60 days or so. And fundamentally, we arrive again at that point where President Trump told us about on the 9th of June, 2024, that the military will revolt at the voting booth, will put the cheat into a period of stasis and apprehension. And we will have some sort of adjudication here in the United States of America, not only for the 2024 election, but also what has occurred between 2020 and 2024, potentially even further back, and what those individuals apprehended in response to this 2024 election cheat, which I think President Trump is actively telling us about right now. They're going to allow this to happen to net the largest amount of traitors humanly possible. I think the investigative component beyond that election towards Memorial Day of 2025 are going to lead us into a period of time where we see a lawful return of authority back to the Republic of the United States, where President Trump is essentially awarded the presidency of the Republic for the United States, and we embark upon a nationwide mission of anti-corruption and occupation operations, which remove the cancer from our society, both domestic and foreign connected, right? So this is a period of time that I'm not sure patriots out there really appreciate and understand. This is a foregone conclusion, but we must write the correct written record. We must record this as all their fault. We must make this fall on their heads and then provide the lawful jurisdiction as a result of their actions. There, I'm referencing the deep state. Resolve, all of this as a result of their actions, transitioning us back to a lawful government of the people, by the people, and for the people, with a militarized force capable of protecting not only the United States from foreign threats, but also domestic threats coordinated by a foreign adversary.
You articulate that so well, and you remind me of a thought process. And I'll revert back to my prior career before I got behind a freaking microphone and a camera in law enforcement. And when you were looking at undercover operations, the safest part of that undercover operation was always at the beginning, because the further you got in deep, or whoever it was that we had undercover going in deep, then you started getting deeper into the intel. You started getting more trusted information. You started collaborating with more dark forces. So it became, much more dangerous for the particular officer or detective that was doing that undercover work. And it's in those moments before, because you get to a point or a threshold where it's like, well, if we unfold the investigation and make the arrest now, we miss out on the important pieces. And then this ugly beast just rears its head again in a couple of years. But if we continue on with this, as dangerous as it's starting to get, we have the ability to take this down from the very, very top. And, I appreciate what you say, and I agree with what you say when you say, I don't think a lot of patriots truly understand, like, that moment we're in right now, like this transition to this facade of freedoms that we've had, at least since I was born, to, like, we're really have the ability, if we unfold this the correct way, which I think they are doing, that we're really going to see what freedom looks like. So to bring it back to the military, are we looking at the military right now and the operations they're doing, and the people that you speak with, where their primary focus is like the mass chaos potentials, the elections, like Trump saying the military will revolt at the ballot? Or is the military also tasked with, ensuring that this financial breakdown, however that looks, and I do have a question about that as well, that the military is tasked with ensuring the safety of all aspects of American life, to media, to the economy, to protection, whether, it be at the local level or the federal level or the military level? Is the military operation here kind of tasked with everything? How does that look from what and the people you talk?
Well, fundamentally, I think this particular component, Alpha, gets into an uncomfortable area of discussion, because most patriots out there, while very devout, very loyal, very astutely informed about the military's responsibility to the United States and about their own component piece and part in this Great Awakening as activated patriots, and I'm utilizing that terminology for the broadest umbrella that I can cast. Fundamentally, what a lot of people forget is that the military's oath is not to the people. The military's oath is to the republic. That is an idea. That is a construct. That is a scaffolding by which we pass a way of life onto the next generation. And so if we end up sacrificing a generation of people to preserve that construct, however tragic and unbelievably incomprehensible that might be, that is considered an acceptable military loss when you're talking about the existential survival of not only the nation, but the idea of the nation into the future. And so I think fundamentally what we're dealing with is a very unfairly weighted scalar system, and I'm utilizing that in the scale term, not the medical term, against the military forces of the Republic, because we're dealing with a significant amount of entrenchment that was installed from really 1991 onward to the present day. We're talking about 4 presidential chief executive officers, presidential executives, if you want to call it that, of the United States corporation, 4 in a row, that sought to erode and disappoint the military's authority and the military's ability to respond to certain cataclysmic national emergencies under legal and lawful U.S. code, and certain treatises and actions that were undertaken by these administrations. So coming forward to the present day, we must simply act within the various law enforcement institutions and law actionable mechanisms that are allowed within U.S. code to subserve or to subvert, maybe is a better way to say that, or circumvent these lawful actions makes us no better at a spiritual level than the very enemy that we're facing down. And we are attempting to iron out and create a new planet, a new pathway, a new method of understanding, a new attitude of behavior towards one another, a new governing right by which, we measure the conduct of ourselves with one another at a domestic level and at an international level. So when we talk about the fundamental survival of human civilization centuries into the future, it becomes very clear to patriots out there that acceptable losses may be much larger than what we've initially been led to believe. And I believe that we're talking about a generational or a once in a millennium style event here in the United States of America and in the Western world, where we're facing down military component traders with inside our deep state control apparatus who would think nothing about setting off rogue weaponry or rogue sleeper cells underneath their finance, perhaps even underneath their command influence, to disappoint the current mission that we're on. Special operations have been necessary from the very beginning. That's why Chris Miller was made the acting Secretary of Defense post-November of 2020, because we entered a period of time where we were not able to press pause on our society without causing an unsustainable and irrevocable civil war situation that would have led directly to the collapse of all of Western civilization as we know it. We needed to remove individuals that had significant command and control influence over large-scale weaponry, over hidden secret budget weaponry, over deployment of various personnel and various equipment that are, considered off book and may move around the planet at will and at whichever order they may please to. We also needed the same period of time to allow us to purge to the greatest extent possible the judiciary, because it is the judiciary that is the civilian control arm of that DoD Pentagon corporate tyranny here in the United States of America. We've seen that recently highlighted by Mike Benz on Tucker Carlson with an interview discussing the imprisonment of Pavel Durov. But fundamentally, Mike Benz is referencing a control model enacted and promulgated by U.S. embassies around the world that has been perfected here at home. We have intense and complete control of the U.S. judiciary that emanates from the civilian executive pulpit of power here in the United States through the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. State Department, and various funding institutions, and also the United States Department of Defense due to its proximity and exposure to FISA and anything that happens in civilian court that may be quote-unquote labeled as a national emergency or national security issue. So we're seeing the actualization, the exposure, and then the simultaneous disappointment of a multidimensional tyrannous state or tyrannical state here in the United States of America and in the NATO Western world. And the military component of this will be the last but the loudest to be exposed, I think, to the public.
You make so many questions populate in my mind. I knew I would be fascinated by this conversation with USG. Before we get too far from the economics part of this, because I wrote some notes, so I don't forget these questions. Two of the biggest things that I get, whether it's through emails or DMs, or these virtual spaces on X, people's concerns are it's their health and their money. I would love for it to be freedom first, but in the reality of it, I'm presented with those questions before I'm presented with anything that's constitutional or liberties. And you had touched on gold earlier, and the petrodollar with the June 9th comments. When you see, and I saw you post something about this recently as well on your X, when you see this collaboration taking place with Russia, with China, with the BRICS nations that's taking place, and this understanding of what you have of the gold standard, what does that kind of play out with? Do we have to see a complete collapse of the way our economy functions right now in the US in order for this new standard that involves gold to take place? Or is this something that can just fluidly go in? Because I know people's concerns are, well, if the economy completely collapses, what happens to people's, retirement accounts or their savings, or people that still have money in these banks that are just completely dangerous? What does that look like for people?
I apologize. It cut out there for a moment, but I think I got the basis of the question there. We're talking about, gold, silver, the transition from the old economy to the new economy, and a crash event. It's really, really difficult to say. I've heard it described a number of different ways, Alpha. One of the most reliable ways that I've ever heard it described was through an email that was sent to me a number of weeks ago, discussing the idea that the things that we leave willingly within their system and within their clutches, those are under their authority to do with them what they will. And we may see disappointment of that. We may see squandering of that or seizure of that. We also might see an absolutely fluid transition. And it's nigh impossible to really say how that's going to be. But I will say this, when we talk about the redefinition of worldwide commerce and finance markets, we cannot persist forward in the petrodollar-based market structure. And I use that terminology very purposefully, market structure, that we've had since 1975 onward to the present day. We cannot allow for certain trade routes to continue to function in the manner that they function. We cannot allow for intelligence organizations within various NATO Western world nations, including Egypt, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, to continue to define foreign policy exchange, especially how that foreign policy pertains to energy. And we cannot allow this continued exposure of U.S. markets in particular to worldwide volatility and vulnerability, because while the U.S. has had a hegemonic control of those markets for a long time, to lose that hegemonic control is tantamount to being the most overexposed that any economy has ever been in all of world history. And I think that it's very possible that we may be in that period of time, in that breach, as it were, even in the present day and in the present moment. We're still waiting, for example, on events coming out of Tehran and likely coming out of Damascus, Syria, and Yemen as well, with respect to a retaliation on Israeli activity in the Middle Eastern segment and in the Middle Eastern quadrant. We know that Israeli energy companies are deeply entrenched and deeply connected to the U.S. bureaucratic deep state, to include Dick Cheney, John Kerry, a number of other individuals around surrounding an energy group called Genie Energy. And there's a number of other companies that are associated with the Israeli energy efforts in the Middle East that would, again, tie directly back to U.S. either intelligence enterprise or U.S. financial and retail enterprise. So we're expecting a significant event to come out of the pulpit of Iran, Syria, and Yemen very soon. I think in response to that, you'll see an overwhelming militarized response in Lebanon and in Syria, which will invoke Turkey into this Muslim conflict in the Middle East. Turkey has sort of prided itself as the de facto Muslim guardian power for at least the last 700 years in that area of the world. So you'll see the Sunni Muslims from Turkey likely involved in coordination and in alliance with the Shiite Muslims out of the pulpit of ancestral Persia, what is modern day Iran, to disappoint militarized activity in that area. And remember, it's very interesting that in any other circumstance, we should see the United States of America coming to Israel's aid and certainly being able to beat back a tremendous amount of the interference that would come from these Middle Eastern powers. But right now, the entirety of the U.S. backstock arms stockpile is tied up and is getting destroyed in eastern Ukraine and in Central and Eastern Europe. So we've got a situation now where Turkey, an active member of NATO, currently accessing itself to the BRICS trade alliance, and certainly in the process of disconnecting from the overarching control of NATO SWIFT and industrial systems. We have this nation, prepped to enter this Middle Eastern conflict. Erdogan saying 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks ago that we can enter Israel in the same fashion that we've entered Libya and that we've entered other areas to put a stop to terrorism. All of this ties back to the health of the petrodollar hydra. When we're talking about the expansion of this conflict, we are also simultaneously talking about the nail literally through the chest of what remains of the petrodollar, the Strait of Hormuz being cut off, the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea both being turned into active war zones, the Eastern Mediterranean being turned into an active war zone. And so all of this affects more than 33%, or 1/3 of all worldwide commercial shipping lanes. So this is an unmistakable event that would come back to the United States and Western NATO world markets just from a commercial standpoint, if anything else, as well as a currency stability standpoint. And I believe that when we see an expression and an expansion of additional hostility in the Middle Eastern world, we will simultaneously witness expansion of hostilities from Beijing and Pyongyang. This 1-2 punch to worldwide markets, Alpha, is going to cripple the US dollar. It's going to cripple North American and Western European industrial markets, and certainly their ability to field any of the weapons of war or even some of the assurances and bulwarks of peace that are necessary within those countries. And it's likely that we see the NATO military industrial apparatus completely paralyzed as a result of this simultaneous activation of worldwide movement. And I don't have to wait all of the way until November 5th to see this. President Trump has talked a number of times just in recent weeks of a 1929 style financial event here in the United States of America. And the outline scenario that I just described a moment ago is not only the most sensible, but is the most rapid progression towards the conditions which would cause exactly that.
Now, talking about a 1929 type of scenario, one variable that we're dealing with here that they weren't dealing with then, at least to my recollection studies, is we also have, infiltration that came through our southern borders. And the number, I've heard it from different people, but we know it's somewhere between 12 and 30 million illegals. And, part of that, I think there's an understanding on the mainstream media, at least what they've acknowledged, from sheriffs and police and intelligence, that at least 2 million of those people would be considered, terrorists from our watch list. So we have a 1929 type of scenario, and we have these people like these Venezuelan gangs. We have the stuff that's taking place in New York, Aurora, Colorado, and I would imagine we'd probably start seeing this in other major cities. What does that look like for just the normal Joe that's just trying to live his life and figure out what the heck's going on? Like, what do they do when this starts to unfold?
Fundamentally, that's a really difficult question to answer. I think what you're seeing with the combination and the marriage of a number of international and transnational organized crime efforts here in the United States is you're seeing the setup for the tie back financially to a number of very focalized entities, those entities being the UN, the United States, Washington, D.C. based bureaucracy, and the CCP out of Beijing. The organized cartel and criminal mafias that we're seeing in the United States, a lot of them being tied back to Tehran, to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to pro-extremist Islamic efforts in the Middle East, but no one stops to ask where the funding for those groups primarily comes from. And it comes from the CCP out of Beijing, the U.S. State Department, USAID, CIA cutouts, and various UN-associated NGOs. This is one of the reasons that we've seen a number of UN NGOs highlighted out by name and by visual reporting from the Central American Peninsula, the Central American pathway and corridor northward from the Darien Gap, just to the south of Mexico. So what we have setting up here is fundamentally the justification for the United States military apparatus, the domestic protection force known as the National Guard, the Marine Corps, and various other militarized components that can be activated under Executive Order 13224, which we talked about just a short while ago. We're talking about the justification being geared and prepared for exactly that type of exposure. But the average Joe, in the meantime, I think needs to be very smart and very head on a swivel. We're dealing with an invasion. It is an invasion. President Trump discusses that as being a militarized invasion of the United States. President Trump has talked a number of times about Chinese assets coming in as a result of this invasion, terrorists from more than 100 countries being invited in as a result of this invasion. And so the irregular warfare component is multi-angular in nature. Not only are we providing the basis to finally take out the corruption legally here in the United States of America by facilitating, or forcing them rather, to facilitate an invasion, which then becomes their undoing. But we are also enrapturing and ensnaring a significant amount of worldwide organized crime that would destabilize entire localized governments in certain jurisdictions, because their military forces and their law enforcement potential is simply not equipped to respond to the type of capacity building that they've been able to manage over the last 40 years, with the result of various CIA and DARPA funds, Pentagon funds, involvement of a number of the intelligence communities worldwide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about what the average Joe does, the average Joe, I think, in this period of time needs to acknowledge that this is a real game, that this is not some sort of pie in the sky ridiculousness, that we are playing for keeps, that we do need to be extremely smart about this, but that at the end of this, we're talking about the inaction, the re-inaction, maybe is the best way to say it, of the levers of power necessary to remove every illegal component from our society. And that includes the corrupt politicians, the corrupt globalist financiers, the academic institutions that facilitated this invasion, the healthcare institutions that provided free healthcare to individuals that were not American citizens as a result of this invasion, and any non-governmental and 501c3 and C4 organization that participated in facilitating a militarized conflict upon the United States of America.
And I'm glad you explained that, and that people realize that this is a real game. And the reason I even suggest this part of the conversation is because we saw what happened with Gretchen Whitmire and the setup there involving our intelligence agencies and the FBI. It looked like a smaller scale of what we kind of saw unfold later with January 6th. And I think that even January 6th is still an operation that was in smaller scale, what this would look like. And that's why I say, for the average Joe to understand what you're saying and to listen to this over and over, so you don't fall into that, because it's at least my understanding. I'd like to get your thought process on this, SG, that these, like you said, these Antifa members and these other mercenaries that are in this country, that will start responding to some of these pockets of chaos that happen, like whether it be Aurora, Colorado. So it looks like, oh, this is a real revolution, or this is a real revolt, or that's taking place, when it's really just something that's synthetic, that the deep state's trying to unfold so that they can play their card on how they want. And I want people to run these scenarios in their head, so when it happens, it's like you say, be patient and understand that the military is going to get these guys the way they expose them. And to add to the fact that this is a game, or what we always say, 5D chess. I want to play this clip. This comes from your ex. It's about 20 seconds, and it's Trump talking about something that Putin says. And I'd like you to kind of walk us through your thought process on what do you think he's saying here. So let me just play it real quick for the audience.
I knew Putin. I knew him well. And, he endorsed, I don't know if you saw the other day, he endorsed Kamala. He endorsed Kamala. I was very offended by that. I wonder why he endorsed Kamala. No, he's a chess player.
He's a chess player. SG, I'll give it to you here because, Putin, I think probably a week and a half ago, put out that if you feel like the country you're in is, not good for you, not healthy for you, and you want to come over to Russia, there's a place for you. But then he turns around and he endorses Kamala, who we know he was targeting the U.S. when he made that statement. What the heck is going on here, man?
I apologize, Alpha. It cut out there again at the last second. We were talking about Putin, irregular warfare, and endorsing Kamala. And I think fundamentally what we've got highlighted by President Trump there in that statement from the rally yesterday in Mosinee, Wisconsin, is that we are living through the greatest irregular warfare operation that has ever been conducted with international cooperation in all of human history. Why would President Putin endorse Kamala and Biden? Come on, patriots have to really exercise their critical thinking. This is the same organization, the same group of people that have stonewalled him in Ukraine. This is the same group of people that have spent more than $150 billion publicly of U.S. money trying to disappoint Putin's activities in Ukraine. This is the same group of people that blew up Nord Stream with the cooperation of Ukrainian mules that they had underneath their control and under their demand. Why in the world would this individual endorse Kamala and endorse anyone associated or tied to the current administration, period? And the answer is irregular warfare. There is now no fashion, no scenario, no circumstance by which the U.S. treasonous media apparatus can claim that Russia is somehow acting in concert or in support of the populist candidate of the United States of America and of the current U.S. presidential election, because that same pulpit, Moscow itself, has now come out and said, no, I want the other person. So this is just an example of being outmaneuvered. This is a perfect example of what Q says when Q says these people are stupid. They have no idea how to respond to what we're doing. They move the game board in one direction. We move it three directions over top of their head before they're able to respond. We position ourselves in such fashion that there's nothing they can do or say that provides them a basis of resupport and rejuvenation. We are literally draining out their ability, not only kinetically to control the geopolitics of the world, but to control the ability of individuals within the NATO Western world to sell the lie, to sell the misperception, and then to manage and control that misperception as an extension of some amount of mind control. This is, a chess move, and President Trump told us that literally explicitly. Putin is a chess player. Q comes out and says, what if Russia and China are coordinating with POTUS to eliminate the NWO? We look at the events that have happened with the People's Liberation Army, with the consistent drilling around Taiwan, with the multiple diplomatic negotiations that have occurred out of Taipei with respect to the Chinese military presence in that area. When we look at the jurisdictional nature of Chinese authority over the South China Sea for 500 years, we can appreciate then that we are living through a period where the individuals acting on behalf of the globalist masters are now headless. They don't have a coordinated origin plan, but they do have their marching orders from last they heard. And so they are marching towards a globalist agenda and being outmaneuvered at every moment and every turn. It's really actually beautiful to watch. I personally find great entertainment in watching the president of Russia embarrass and completely disappoint the propaganda operations present here in the United States of America. And I'm fully expecting greater embarrassment and entertainment towards Beijing as we move closer to November 5th.
So, speaking of irregular warfare, and if that wasn't enough, I want to continue on with one more, and then I got the final question that I want to turn over to you. I want to bring this up on the screen. This is also from your ex. I think the only people that saw this move unfolding like this were the people following the boards, who, ever since RFK had even announced that he was entering the race, if people even suggested this, they were known as or labeled as conspiracy theorists, Q, or the way mainstream media says, QAnons. But yet here we are. We see this unity to take place. I mean, this kind of just continues with the irregular warfare that you're talking about. You want to comment on this before I ask you the last question?
Well, fundamentally, Bobby Kennedy and Trump coming together, I think that this should have been on every Anon's expectation list, because Q fundamentally is a unification operation. We're overtaking 3 decades of very divisive, artificially inflated societal control that began really with the drug crisis facilitated by H.W. Bush, then put into high gear under President Clinton, along with various NATO activities. And then post 9/11, all bets were off. We saw a tremendous amount of encroachment and exposure at a divisive nature here in our culture, all of it deployed on purpose, all of it deployed operationally, in a position to destabilize our consciousness. And so we are witnessing counter operations towards that very model playing out in real time. So Bobby Kennedy's agreement with and coming into the Trump camp, this is poetic on so many levels. It's almost hard to talk about, Alpha. We're talking about the Kennedy family finally getting their say against the intelligence community. We're talking about the Kennedy family traitors being exposed for who they are. We're talking about the union of the Kennedy Democrat side of the party, which constituted the lion's majority share of the Democrat voting base for more than 4 decades post 1962. into the early 2000s. We're talking about an individual who has been actively campaigning against Big Pharma in the strongest of terms, now being offered a transition team spot for what is obviously going to be the next U.S. incoming presidential administration. And we're talking about, a we the people bull in a china shop in the form of President Trump, talking about how we're going to make this country not only great again, but healthy again, too. That's a direct attack against not only big pharma, but against big ag, big food, and big chemical, all three of which are associated in the food supply chain to the tune of a few $1 trillion a year here in the United States of America. So this cannot be overstressed. I don't think that we could talk about this in emphatic enough terms. We're talking about the unification of the American electorate basis in a personified, visible form against the deep state component that is not only out for our freedom. I was saying this is absolutely huge. This deals with a group that is not only, or this deals with the public-facing presentation for unification around the concepts of not only taking back our freedoms, but taking back the health and wellness of our bodies and our vitality as well, our energy levels, right? We've been poisoned for a number of decades through one means or another. And we can actually trace that pattern back at least as far as the bubonic plague epidemic of Dark Ages in Europe between 1343 and 1352 AD. So what you've got right now is an historic association, a blending of the electorate base socially, politically, ideologically, with the greater concepts, which is unity, liberty, health, freedom, the pursuit of happiness in this United States of America. This is a huge, huge issue that, again, I don't think until we get to the election or very near the election, we're going to understand, Alpha, just how big and just how important this alignment of interests really is.
I completely agree. And when it comes to health and fitness, I absolutely love seeing that you got Bobby right there to be next to Trump, because Trump needs to stop pushing that damn McDonald's. But I'm sure that there's probably a decode even behind that. SG, the final one that I want to bring up. So, and I'll bring up this article, and it ties to something that hit X. I always tell my audiences on all these different platforms that I kind of see X, formerly Twitter, as kind of the trenches in this information warfare. And we saw this past week that the FBI came out with, not that I trust the FBI by any means, but that the FBI came out and said, hey, Tenet Media, you had Lauren Chen, Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, that there's these this financial support system that's happening behind the curtain. And then you have, this unsealed FBI doc that exposes terrifying depth of, quote, Russian disinformation scheme. But when you go into this article, it is, let me see, now I went a little too far down, but there's a part, and I'll find it here because I want to highlight it for everybody. They talk about, here we go. So this is the part that I wanted to read for everyone. Well, of particular note, the documents released Wednesday included an affidavit that noted a Russian company is keeping a list of more than 2,800 influencers worldwide, about 1/5 of whom are based in the United States, to monitor and potentially groom to spread Russian propaganda. Now, we know that there's operatives that are operating in every aspect of this media world, whether it be on social media platforms, podcasting, radio, alternative media, mainstream media. Like, we know the operatives are out there. Where are they going with this? Why is the FBI bringing this? Is this a thing of projection? Have the White Hats been able to regarner control of the FBI? So now there's going to be a strategic attack on these influencers who've been misinforming and disinforming, not just the American audience, but the world audience. What's your take on that?
You're asking about a topic that I'm currently researching right now, so I'm going to be really careful with my words because I just want to talk about the things that I can corroborate to myself personally. If you remember, we saw it was the FBI itself and Jim Comey himself that actually ended up publicly disappointing Hillary's aspirations. All of us are very well aware that NSA, Admiral Mike Rogers, and a number of other forces were intensely involved in what actually occurred there. But in October of 2016, we saw the October surprise come out with the reopening of investigations into the hidden server issue going back to Hillary, the DNC, and a number of other pulpits. And so publicly, that became the basis for this is why Hillary, the DNC, the Democrat side lost. I think in many regards, post-2020 and post-2021 in particular, you've seen interagency warfare being played out in real time. Various components of DHS working against both itself and against criminal child sexual trafficking networks worldwide. Various components of the U.S. FBI division engaged in harassing of Catholic mothers, and yet at the same time, this is the same FBI that just recently is arresting former aide to Governor Kathy Hochul out of New York. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of Chinese traitorship and treachery that exists within that New York governorship, just based on the activities of the prior governor, of which Kathy Hochul was the lieutenant. So looking at this, operation, I think what we've got here is fundamentally the same type of Comey setup that we had in 2016. I think we have instruments and components of various law enforcement administrations that have been placed into lock and key submission in one form or another with larger scale U.S. military preservation operations that dovetail under continuity of government operations into law enforcement nature. And that is present in FEMA's Continuity Directive 1. It is legal for the U.S. military to involve law enforcement apparatuses alongside its own law enforcement investigative efforts during a catastrophic national emergency. And I think that's exactly what we've been witnessing, and a lot of that coordination happening for a number of years now. I'm fully expecting that we see the FBI begin to sort of lap its tongue, if you will, at certain high level and high profile Democrat names as we come into that election season. I'm looking for our October surprise upcoming to be associated with some form of FBI or DHS investigation, because we know these are the two primary law enforcement organizations that within their main body systems have been associated with enforcing internet crimes against children task force investigations that has been a multinational law enforcement effort going back to 2018. So, it's a difficult question to answer, because on the one hand, we have the very significant possibility that what's going on is a broader level of misdirection to provide certain public basis. And on the other hand, we have the possibility that we have isolated out certain, I wouldn't call them traitors, but certain self-interested assets that are not exactly out there to inform we the people. And it's interesting to note that the DOJ indictment, in conjunction with the FBI case that was presented, discusses this operation as being victimizing of those individuals who signed contracts. In other words, they were not fully represented and informed about the things that were actually occurring. And so how much of that is reasonably true to say on its face versus how much of that was meant to draw out a higher functionality or a different loyalty, I think that's nigh impossible to answer, Alpha, prior to the conclusion of this phase of military operations.
I find it very interesting, brother. Like I said, I'm expecting everything to start looking pretty wild the closer we get to November 5th. I just want to say, SG, I knew I would thoroughly enjoy this conversation. You absolutely supplied me with that enjoyment. So I, on behalf of my audience and me, I thank you for that. Before I let you go, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to make sure the audience hears? And I'll give you the final.
The only thing I think I would say, Alpha, with respect to all of this, is this conversation has dealt with the most likely scenarios that lay before us. Fundamentally, though, this November election season here in the United States of America, it's not just about the election day. It's about the entirety of the season that we're going to, and it's the most important season for this republic, for the people, of the people, by the people, that was usurped away from us as a result of a catastrophic civil war in the 19th century. And we are finally correcting that record, finally getting control back from a hypocrisy masqueraded as our lawful government. Time where The Sunshine Patriot is going to have a difficult time adjusting to the situation because sinew and bone is really necessary as we go through this process. It has been tough. It's been ending, exhausting in many regards for spiritual side of things. But fundamentally, this is a culture war for the minds, hearts, and soul of our nation. And with that war comes the future of where America goes, and where America goes, so goes the world. This is important chosen time. It can be cold. We do win at the end of the day. President reminded us of that through his season post just a couple of I think it was yesterday on X and Truth Social. Military law enforcement forces are working in the background to monitor the things that are happening in this country, but we the people must be present at the fight.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. Your ability not only to obtain this information, but your ability to articulate to it to where we can understand it. It's bar none, SG. Ladies and gentlemen, SG Anon, all the links to follow this man down in the description below. If you never heard of him, one, I don't know where you've been, but if you have heard of him and you haven't been following him, I made it easy. You just got to go down there, click it, and then hit follow. With that, you guys, God bless, Semper Fi, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. This has been the AlphaWarrior Show. First in, last out. Stick around. We ran it commercial free. Support the people who support this podcast. Good night, everybody.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
Are you worried about the effects that higher inflation rates will have on your investments? Are you trying to secure your retirement savings against losses, but you notice that inflation is a hot topic these days? But how dangerous are low inflation rates on your retirement savings? An inflation rate of 2% may not seem like much, but it means that prices will just about quintuple over the lifetime of the average American. And 4% average inflation rate means that something that costs $1 when they're born will cost $23 when they die. That demonstrates the danger of even low inflation rates. So when it comes to gold and inflation rates, many investors want to know whether inflation rates have an effect on gold prices. What history indicates is that over the long term, increased inflation should lead to correspondingly higher gold prices. From September 1971 to August 2020, gold grew 7.5 times as much as inflation. Not only can an investment in physical gold help protect your assets against the damage done by inflation, it can also help grow the value of your retirement portfolio over the long term. If you're looking to protect your retirement assets, why wait until stock markets crash and gold begins to rise in price?
I'm excited to announce my all-new mattress topper. In the times we're in, I wanted to bring you the best affordable mattress topper ever. So I took my two best technologies and combined them to make the ultimate mattress topper. And now you can get it for as low as $69.98. Queen size, only $99.98. It all starts with my famous MyPillow foam that provides you that overall full body support. Second is the individual comfort supports that give you an amazing custom sleep experience. It's like it's made specifically for you. The queen size alone has over 14,000 comfort supports. This is the perfect mattress topper to improve any bed. New bed, old bed, your guest beds. Get them for every bedroom in your house. Go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get the all-new My Mattress Topper for as low as $69.98. Queen size, only $99.98. Don't delay, order today.
you.